Have you had your 8 cups today? Let's talk about water. What's up, fellow plant enthusiasts? My name is Dylan Bain and this is Bain's Botanicals. Today we're going to be talking about water. This is a really important video because water is vital to all life on Earth and plants are no exception. And watering is probably the most we really get to interact with our plants. I mean, that's the thing that we do the most. We don't repot very much, we don't clean the leaves that much, but we water all the time, it seems like. So let's get into it a little bit. Water is absorbed through the roots of a plant into the plant itself and transported through little passageways called xylem. And if you notice your plant wilting, I can explain to you what wilting is. So inside of a plant cell, unlike an animal cell, there is a big central void inside the cell called a vacuole, and it is within this vacuole that the plant cell holds water. On the outside of a plant cell is something called the cell wall, which animal cells also don't have. And when this vacuole in the center is full, it pushes out, and this rigid cell wall pushes against other plant cells, and it kind of like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. When they're pushing against each other like that, it's kind of like a balloon getting full. If you have like a group of balloons, they start to push against each other. That's what plant cells do, and it's called turgor pressure. And turgor pressure is what keeps plants like upright. So if you have a peace lily and it's starting to wilt and look really sad, it's because it needs to be watered. Those central vacuoles within the plant cell are getting empty, and the cell isn't able to put enough pressure to push the cells together. Like, that's maybe the most simplest way I could put it. I need like a visual. But yes, that's wilting. And some plants wilt, some plants just start dying, but that's it in a nutshell. For me, I kind of categorize houseplants by how much water they need, and I've come up with my own little scale of 1 to 5. 1 being the most thirsty. I guess it could be the least thirsty. Let's just not do numbers. Forget the numbers. Basically from the most thirsty to the least thirsty. So let's start at the least thirsty, because those are the easiest ones. Least thirsty are the ones that you don't have to pay as much attention to. So I would put in that category cacti. This is a Pachycereus. I don't know the species, but it is a totem pole cactus. I think when I got this, it was maybe about right there. It's been about a year ago, so it's putting out a decent amount of growth. I mean, if you look at a cactus, it's basically just a tank of water. I don't mean like a tank like a fish tank. I mean like it's a hardy military tank, because it's just, they're so rigid, and this one doesn't have spines, but a lot of cacti do as a defense. It's just full of water. Like, this thing lives in the desert, and it can be successful because of how hardy it is. That being said, they're more susceptible to root rot, so you don't want to overwater. Cacti, I would say, are probably the only ones I would put in that category of the least thirsty. So the next step down would be succulents. This is a Portulacaria. Succulents are just not as hardy as cacti, and I think that's where a lot of people make the mistake with their watering. Assuming that they're not overwatering, they could be underwatering. And this guy, I don't know if you can see in the pot, but there's a lot of dried up dead leaves because I'm not watering this enough. Even though the leaves are succulent, even though the stems themselves are also succulent, they're just full of water, the leaves are thinner. This thing, it spreads out. It's more susceptible to dehydration than a cactus. It just is. And that includes all succulents. That's aloe and gasteria and agave and jade plant, crassula, like all of those. They need a little bit more water than cacti do. They don't need to be soaked, like as in soaking wet a lot, but they They need to be watered a little bit more. That's just kind of it. The next step down from that is like the middle step. That's where the majority of houseplants fall. That's going to be the pothos and the philodendron and the chlorophytum spider plants and the peperomia and all of the things that you think of that are easy for tropicals. That's going to be that middle step. They need to be watered regularly, and maybe you let them dry out, but you don't let them stay dry, but you also don't keep them wet like you do some plants. The one I have sitting here is a Peperomia quadrangularis. I only picked this because I wanted to say quadrangularis. But yeah, I think it's also called a beetle peperomia, so it's pretty cool. But yeah, peperomia being so easy care, they kind of fall into that category. Now we're going to go to the thirsty side of the scale. The next step down is going to be houseplants that you think about as being thirsty plants that are maybe a little bit more complicated. So your calatheas, your all the prayer plants, Maranta, Tenanthe, Stramanthe, Goipertia, Alocaceas, Spathiphyllum, the peace lilies. What am I missing? Some ferns, like a kangaroo paw fern. This is a little Asplenium, bird's nest fern. It's kind of got a little more rigid leaves, so it still needs water, but it's not too dainty. That's going to be that category. The final one is the most thirsty plants. Now, these are the plants that, in general, you can't just keep them carefree. I'm talking about the majority of the ferns, like maidenhair ferns, Boston ferns. When they're inside, when they're outside, they do okay, but inside it's a little bit different. Homalamina, I would probably put in that category. Plants that they need more even constant moisture. You never let a fern dry out all the way. You just don't do it, because then they die. Like they just do. Carnivorous plants, that's another big one. Now, humidity plays a factor in some of these too, but carnivorous plants, if you ever see them in the store, not the Venus flytraps. I'm talking if you go to like a greenhouse, they typically have them displayed in a tray that's just full of water. Like, they just need that constant moisture because their environment is such that it's kind of a swamp, kind of a boggy, something that never dries out. Because if you've ever owned a carnivorous plant and you let it dry out, you don't have a carnivorous plant anymore, you have trash. Those in that category tend to be the ones that need a terrarium. They need a lot of extra attention. They're more of like the expert level of plant care. Did you see me show anything in that category? Because I don't have any. Because the ones I've had have died. It's just kind of how it is. I do have, I did have, I should say, a Pinguicula, which is a butterwort. It's a type of carnivorous plant that the leaves are kind of sticky and it catches like fungus gnats and things. This sucker dried out and now it's dead. It just doesn't look good. That or, yeah, it's pretty dry. It's okay. That was just a little experiment. I'd never owned one before, so I wanted to try it, but yeah. Moving on, now we're going to talk about watering, like practically, like how do you water, how much do you water, how often do you water. I always water from the top. I know some people water from the bottom so that the plant can kind of absorb water the way that it would naturally. I've just never done that. I guess I'm old school. My mom always watered from the top, so I water from the top. You can do either way, but yeah, that's it. As far as the frequency of how much you water is going to depend on the plant that you have. It's going to depend on how big the plant is, and it's going to depend on how much light you have, what kind of pot it's in. So we already did the types of plants that need more water. Bigger plants are going to need, they're going to need to be watered less, because they're going to be in more soil, so the soil is going to retain water more. If you have a little baby plant, like, I don't have any baby plants right here. This one's pretty small. Like, I need to water this more because there's not as much soil here, so it's going to dry out faster. This needs to be watered more often. But if you have a big plant like this one right here, this Scindapsus trebui, however you say it, I only water that probably once every couple of weeks because it's in a huge pot and it just, I don't know, it retains water pretty well. The type of pot matters. Terracotta dries out faster. Plastic and ceramic tend to dry out slower because there's not as much moisture being wicked. So if you have a plant in a plastic pot, you're not going to have to water it as much. What was another thing I said? How much light it's getting. So if a plant's not getting a lot of light, it's not executing photosynthesis as much, so it's not using as much water. Now this is especially true, think about it, in the wintertime. We don't water our plants as much in the wintertime because they're not getting as much light. I think with like a cactus, for example, in the wintertime, I water my cactus maybe once a month. Now in the growing season, I'll do it probably once every week or every couple of weeks because they're using a lot of light, they're growing, they're actively needing that nutrition. But yeah, if you've got a plant in an office, for example, and it's just getting like ambient fluorescent light, you're not gonna have to water it as much. If you do water it too much, it's gonna get root rot because it's not using all of that water. Now, if you have a plant that's outside on your porch and it's getting like, you know, some ambient light, or if it's a plant that can take some direct sun or something, you're gonna have to water that a lot because not only is it outside in that light, the heat's drying it out. If it's windy, that wind is drying out the leaves and everything. So you wanna be aware of your plant's environment and kind of how it functions within that environment. Your pots should always have drainage holes. When we're talking about watering, your pots should always have drainage holes. Don't waste your time getting pots that don't have a drainage hole, unless it's a cover pot. Now, if it's a cover pot, you know, you could lift your plant out of it and dump the excess water out. But don't plant your plant in a pot that doesn't have a drainage hole because you're just asking for root rot. The water needs to be able to drain out of the soil so that it doesn't get nasty. It gets nasty and it just causes mold growth and root rot and just all kinds of bad things. So you just make sure your plant pot has a drainage hole. Talking about drainage holes, if you keep your plant in a saucer, like this one doesn't quite fit, it kind of sits on top, that's a bad example. Let's use, so I've got this, wow. I got this recently and I forgot what it was because I've never had it before. Anyway, see the pot fits right down in that saucer. It's good to use saucers, but you want to make sure that you empty the saucer out. You don't want the plant sitting in water in the saucer. Otherwise, again, your plant's going to take up too much water, or it's just going to be sitting in water and it's probably going to die. Unless you have a carnivorous plant, because they like that. But the majority of plants hate that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else relating to water. Oh, water quality. Tap water, most people probably use tap water to water their plants. Most people don't have filtered water on their houses or want to spend a bunch of money buying distilled water in jugs or anything. I mean, that can be a big hassle. So most plants do fine with tap water because plants have a way of kind of pushing the things that they don't need, like the minerals and things. They can filter that stuff out. It's good. No, I'll come back to that. Some plants, though, you don't want to water with tap water. Good examples would be ferns. You don't really want to water ferns with tap water. Things like calatheas are a little more sensitive to tap water. I'm not saying that they will die if you water them with that, but you'll probably notice more browning around the edges of the leaves, just because calatheas, for example, they don't have the same ability to get rid of those minerals. So the minerals just kind of stay in the leaves and it starts to cause problems. If you can water them with like rainwater or distilled water, that would be best. But yeah, most plants aren't too picky though, thankfully. Or like carnivorous plants, never water a carnivorous plant with distilled water, with tap water, because it'll kill it. That being said, where was I going with that? I had another point about that. Oh, when you do water with tap water, you're gonna see, especially on terracotta pots, you're gonna see salt and mineral buildup. So every now and then it's good to flush your pots. Maybe, kind of depends on the plant and the pot it's in and everything, but you want to flush your pot maybe a few times a year, where you just let the water run through the plant for a good minute or two, and just let it keep draining, of course. Let it keep draining so that it kind of flushes out any built up minerals and things. Something like most of your palms can be kind of susceptible to salt buildup, so you want to make sure you flush those so that you don't get problems down the road. And it's just good. It's good to it's just giving your plant kind of a bath, more or less. I want to say that's it about watering. I know this is probably the longest video I've made. There's a lot to say about water. Water is really important. So I guess my takeaway is just kind of keep an eye on your plants. I would err on the side of underwatering if you're trying to experiment and see what your plant needs, because it's easier to bounce back from that. If your plant gets root rot, it's really hard to salvage. So better to underwater than to overwater, especially with like cacti and succulents. But yeah, just do your best, and every new plant is an experiment. Like I said, my little dead one here didn't do very well, and this one is an experiment. It's kind of wilty right now. Clearly I need to water it, but don't beat yourself up if you lose a plant. Everybody loses plants. That's just part of the hobby. So if you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'm trying to do really good about responding to you guys, and we can learn together. I've already learned some things from you guys just from responding to your comments, so I'm having to do my homework and stuff now and everything. It's been a while. I think that's it. Thank you guys for your support. Thank you for following and everything. And until the next video, I will see you guys real soon. Thank you.